Brand is not only built by marketing and content. Brand is built by delivering an incredible product, delivering a great experience, being in business for a long time, having other people talk about you. There's a lot of things that come from a brand that take a very, very long time to develop and have nothing to do with marketing. The real solution is to look at how you're spending your money today, which most of it is on transactional activities, to use signals and signal analytics to find all of the waste in that, and then to leverage some of that waste combined with benchmarks and other data that I'm going to be talking about soon, and then reallocate some of that to net new experiments that are built on creating demand, which might have a side effect of building brand. Coming up on the end of Q2, at least for people that have like regular calendar quarters. We have that at Paceto and Refine Labs, some of the other companies I'm involved in. Some of our customers have especially companies in Canada seem to have like the end of January be the start of February be the start of the fiscal year, so it's a little off, but wishing everyone a good close. Like hopefully the quarter's going strong, wishing everyone a good close. I know a lot of companies are going to be reevaluating their 2024 plan at the middle half of the year, which happens in June and July. During that QBR process, thinking, are we on track to our goals? Do we have to make certain changes? Do we have to make adjustments to how we're budgeting, increasing investment, decreasing investment? Where's that going to come from? So I think a lot of those conversations are starting to happen as people reevaluate their growth plan for the rest of the year. Interested to see what the outcomes of that are. And, it hasn't been like this for a while, but for a lot of certain years at the half of the year, companies were like, let's deploy, we're going way ahead of plan. Let's deploy more capital. Let's increase investment. Let's start doing those things. Lately, it's been more of the reverse. Hey, we're behind plan. We need to pull back. We need to get CAC back in line. I'm hoping that sometime in the near future, we're starting to see the flip where it's more so a lot more offense than defense as we go. A lot of that comes down to planning. I haven't talked enough about planning. For instance, like whether it's the Salesforce stock, or I had a conversation with one of our customers last week where it's like Q2, like our chief revenue officer, it's the first time since I've been here that we're projecting a revenue miss. And then the question really becomes, is it a revenue miss due to performance, or is it a revenue miss due to poor planning? I don't think people have that discussion enough. They think the plan is the plan. So if we miss the plan, it must be due to performance. But sometimes I want to explore a lot more the planning side of it. And so anyway, I got 3 topics I want to get into today. They're all kind of different, but we'll cover those and then we'll get into any questions that people want help with specifically. So the first thing that I wanted to talk through, Trust Radius and Pavilion put out a report recently. Let me figure out what the exact title is because I got it up here, but I'm like on slide 50, so I have to scroll back real quick. Titled 2024 B2B Buying Disconnect Report, the Year of the Brand Crisis. It talks through, and I encourage people to check that out. I haven't gone through it in complete detail, but I've skimmed through it. I kind of get a sense of what they're going after here. I'm talking about the way that people are evaluating vendors, that like if you build brand, that like a lot of times the companies are going to make a short list of only 3 vendors and they're going to pick the vendor. They often have the vendor that they want to buy picked before they even reach out to people, with the whole, sentiment around we need to start, building brand. And so I want to share some of my thoughts on here because while I agree with a lot of the things that are in this report, I think the way that I see it is a little bit differently than how people have been communicating it. 1, brand is not only built by marketing and content. Brand is built by delivering an incredible product, delivering a great experience, being in business for a long time, having other people talk about you. There's a lot of things that come from a brand that take a very, very long time to develop and have nothing to do with marketing. So that's something that I want to be clear on. When you think about companies that get to the short list of the 3 vendors that they want to choose, most of those vendors are very mature in their path and very mature in the existing category. That's not replicated by starting a podcast or building your brand or something like that. Another thing that people in the report, it was mentioned that I believe the number was that on average, companies believe that they spend 38% of discretionary marketing spend on brand. First off, who's defining what is brand versus demand gen? So it's very difficult to understand and get this because there's no clear definition of when something should be a brand activity versus a demand gen activity. Secondarily, when we run the reports and look at all the actual spend, our estimate is less than 10% of discretionary marketing spend is spent on brand, significantly less than what's reported in this report. And then lastly, some people have been commenting like the solution to this is to build brand. Like Signals isn't going to fix this. Signals isn't the savior. The solution is to build brand. So I want to kind of break this down for you. For an established company to just say, okay, we're going to build brand. So let's stop spending all this money on performance marketing and SDRs, and we're going to cut our sales team and we're going to reallocate all this money to building brand. That strategy, one, will never take off in a company, would never happen. And secondarily, if they even got there, it would be demonstrated a failure within a very short period of time because all of the metrics in the company are not built around it. The solution is not to just say, like blindly, we need to build brand because of this report and then start doing stuff. The real solution is to look at how you're spending your money today, which most of it is on transactional activities, to use signals and signal analytics to find all of the waste in that, and then to leverage some of that waste combined with benchmarks and other data that I'm going to be talking about soon, and then reallocate some of that to net new experiments that are built on creating demand, which might have a side effect of building brand. There's like very much a polarization happening here between the people in the brand camp and people in the signal camp or people in the performance marketing camp or things like that. The real answer is figuring out how to look at them all together and make decisions that are best for the go-to-market, not on these individual silos. One of the things that I think is really interesting when you think about having these types of new things that some people would call building brand or creating demand or whatever, top of funnel, whatever someone would use as a terminology to describe these types of activities, that we need to, when we make these types of changes, we need to be centered on the right metrics that measure the actual success of these things across the go-to-market. And so I want to talk through, we get these questions from customers a lot, about what are the right metrics to track at the C level about if these changes are actually making an impact. The first place to start is thinking about investor metrics and top-level financial metrics. Those metrics could include trailing 12-month growth rate, year-over-year growth rate in terms of ARR or revenue. That breaks down into NRR, net revenue retention, gross revenue retention, net new ARR, which would be total ARR, and then how that breaks down between new business and then existing customer base expansion, total sales and marketing costs as a percentage of net new ARR. Then you could even break that down a little further and then break it into net new business and then expansion business. And you have the top level metrics that the CFO cares about, the investors care about, the board cares about, all right there. And then underneath that, then we have our go-to-market performance metrics. We have our metrics around productivity, conversion, velocity, things like that. Think sales velocity, win rate, ACV, pipeline created, pipeline created to the amount of spend to create pipeline ratio. You have a nice little framework between the things that the C-level cares about and then the underlying metrics that are going to project productivity and things like that, and look at that quarter by quarter. We'll have something documented around how to look at this. Winning by Design has an interesting framework that's relatively aligned to what I just said. Using those metrics as the centerpiece to say, we're going to shift 20% of our budget from fucking wasting money on Google ads to using that money to do these 6 activities that are built around building brand, that in 6 months goes by, to not look at it and say it failed because we didn't get more demo requests, and to instead say it succeeded because we lowered our sales and marketing expenditures as a percentage of revenue by 14%, and make sure that we're looking at these types of changes and measuring them at the right altitude of the business. I think, and especially I popularized some of these things back in the day because it was the best thing that I knew at the time. But a lot of the changes that we make in our marketing strategy are not going to show up in traditional marketing metrics. They're going to show up as go-to-market metrics. They're going to show up in sales velocity. They're going to show up in retention rate potentially, because we're bringing on a lot of new customers. And we really need to open the aperture when we think about some of these changes about how it impacts the entire business, the entire go-to-market machine, not just the marketing metrics that we historically look at. So that's something that there'll be more data on. If people have questions on that, I haven't talked about that much. Would love to have discussions around that for people that are thinking about that or have tried that when we get into that part. And then lastly, there's another side topic, but we're going through a lot of budgeting things, and especially at larger organizations, think upper mid-market and enterprise types of companies, the way that they think about their budgeting process is very segmented. So they'll budget by region, and then inside of regions, they'll try to budget by segment. So they're going to have a certain budget carved out for the enterprise in Ireland, and they're going to try and break that down and do that across all the different regions and all the different segments to try and understand exactly how much money they're spending to acquire an enterprise customer versus an SMB customer. The problem is that most of the spend in the budget cannot be attached directly to a specific segment of customer. Your Google ads, you don't know whether that Google ad is being served to an SMB customer or a company with 10,000 employees. You can't control that. Your product marketing headcount, you don't control whether that's being allocated directly to enterprise or to SMB. The agency that you hire, if you have a webinar that's run or content that's being created, it's very difficult to say that expense was 100% to this segment. So companies take shortcuts and they say, because 30% of our MQLs are from Google Ads or enterprise customers, that I guess 30% of the Google Ads budget should be divided to the enterprise so we can make our calculation. And it's really like an assumption that's generally not accurate from our experience. And so instead, there's a process, especially at large companies, to think about. The first part of the process is how much should we spend on marketing in total? You can get there through a combination in sales and marketing percentage of net new ARR, in combination with benchmarks of how other companies like you spend, in combination with the performance of your existing investments. And so you can triangulate into how much should we spend on marketing globally. The next thing that has the most control is how much do we spend in each region. You can control your Google Ads investments, that these ads only get served in North America, or these ads only get served in Canada, or anything like that. So you can break down your investments by the region in a much more accurate way. And then you have, okay, we're going to spend $20 million on marketing. North America, for whatever strategic reason, is going to get $14 million out of that $20 million. Then you have basically your base. And then from there, you basically divide the investments. These are investments that are going to happen across the entire customer set, which is likely like $10 million. And then we have $4 million that we can run targeted things to specific accounts where we can fully control it. There are not that many strategies where you can perfectly control this strategy is targeted at this type of company. Outbound, independent sales prospecting, sure, you can say only go after these accounts. LinkedIn advertising, you can get pretty close to it. You can use certain tools to get Facebook and Meta advertising closer. But outside of that, there's not a lot of things to say this expense is directly at this type of segment. And so I just see companies get caught up in that process, trying to budget primarily by segment first, and it just leads to a lot of assumptions and potential inaccuracies. So I think global, region, and then segments as an addition on top of that, I think is the correct flow in terms of how you're thinking through your budgeting or how you're thinking about adjusting your plan for the back half of the year. And so with all that, there was some financial stuff, some budgeting stuff. We are coming up on the end of Q2. So people are going to be rethinking their plans. So happy to talk through literally anything related to what I talked about or something else that you're working on that you think is interesting. So looking forward to getting into it and appreciate you all being here.
Awesome. We'll get a couple of questions queued up here. I did have a follow-up DM about budgeting for events based on, they could budget based on geo and where the events held place, all of that. They're struggling with how to solidify which events should be measured against what metrics for like new logo acquisition versus expansion. And really, the question is, what's your opinion on should events have one main goal or multiple goals that an event supports from an ROI perspective?
One person's belief here, and many people will disagree with me on this. I think that especially with how large the investments are in specific events with companies, I think that a really healthy rule of thumb and a really smart way to look at it is that we need to generate enough revenue that pays for the event. And if we can't do that, then we shouldn't spend $500,000 on this event, the booth, T&E, the sponsorships, paying 50 grand so our CEO can talk. I know other people will say we did it for brand and people like more people know about us. And if we weren't there, our competitors wouldn't see us. And we had 5 meetings with customers in the booth and we had 16 meetings with prospects in coffee shops. And when you mash all that together, we got a great ROI on the event. And so I understand how people do it today. But I think that given the other ways that you could deploy this money on events, that if you are not getting a one-to-one payback in terms of actual revenue from events, then you're either not doing the event right or you shouldn't be at that event anymore. If you're at the right event, you should be able to have hundreds of meetings. If you have a large company with salespeople that are there, you're paying T&E to get there, you have a booth, you should be able to have hundreds of sales meetings with new prospects. You should be able to have 50 or 100 meetings with your top customers about renewal and expansion opportunities. You should be able to attach meaningful direct ROI from these events. Otherwise, I would really challenge whether or not you need it, because that $500,000 to that event could be deployed in a bunch of other ways that could drive a direct one-to-one ROI. And I think that at this point, we have to be forced to start to make choices around where does this $500,000 go to get the best ROI, not just we're going to spend all this money in all these different places. That's my perspective overall. I know people will disagree with it. I watch how companies report on their event spend and attach all these different ancillary assumed types of metrics about because we did this, our brand awareness went up. There's no measurement around it. There's no proof that it actually made an impact, but they'll claim brand awareness. They'll calculate how many people walked through the booth and they scanned on a badge and they'll say, well, at that point, we got $200 cost per demo or $200 cost per lead badge or something like that and use that as a way to justify it. At this point, really need to be scrutinized against actual business outcomes, not like ancillary or secondary metrics. The secondary metrics are great to support a positive direct ROI, but I think using them as a replacement to direct ROI can be very dangerous and is proving very dangerous for companies in terms of, a lot of companies are very over-invested in events. Think you spend $50 million a year on sales and marketing total, and you'll spend, including T&E and time and all that stuff, $15 million in events. So like 35% of your total sales and marketing expenditures across the entire year are built around going in the field and doing these events and not getting even anywhere close to $15 million in net new ARR. It just creates a very, inefficient proposition when you use influence revenue models and other metrics like that. I'd love to have discussions on that. If there's anyone else that spends a lot on events and thinks differently about that, would love to debate that topic live if people feel differently, because I want the feedback of what other people think. But if I was the CEO of a company and I was thinking about how am I going to deploy my investments to not only grow faster, but also have positive EBITDA and free cash flow and a great overall business, that I would be scrutinizing events very heavily on the ROI. And a possible solution would be, okay, like we spent $15 million on events last year. Next year, we're going to spend $5 million on events, and the other $10 million is going to go to the bottom line in profit. We're not going to reallocate that. We're going to use that as free cash flow. And I feel like that should be that's another discussion that is happening at the C-level that I think should be had too.
I think there's a large popularity in more micro events, smaller events that are much more controllable for direct ROI compared to conferences. But I'm going to bring on Amy, who wants to chat about events. And then Mason, after events, we're coming to you.
Thank you, Sydney. Mine actually was not about events. I wasn't sure. I put in the chat, like, it's unrelated. It's not related to some of the stuff that we talked about, but I figured I could get Chris's insight. Is that okay?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, so I wrote it down. So I just switched companies a few months ago and I'm reporting to the CRO directly, and she manages both sales and marketing. And over the last like 2-3 weeks, I've been digging into the lead scoring and handoff from marketing to sales. And it's become really clear that like the handoff is pretty much that like if marketing gets an email address, like from a webinar, for example, that it's like fair game for sales to follow up with them. So I'm curious, like, just from your perspective, how you would approach a conversation with the CRO around like why this is a very faulty strategy. And for like a little bit more context too, we're not seeing any marketing influenced opportunities right now. And it's been this type of strategy that's been in place for probably like more than 10 months at this point.
How many people work at the company, just so we have a sense of scale?
So the company has around 60 people total in marketing. I am one of 2 full-time people, and there's another third like part-time person. But I'm the only person who's doing like demand gen.
Got it. And
There was a person who was there before me who brought me in. He's not at the company anymore, but he was the only person in charge of like the anything for demand gen.
and what is the outcome that you want, and why do you think that's the right outcome?
Well, I think the outcome that I'm looking for is just for there to be some sort of like clearer parameters around like if somebody shows interest, like how are we scoring that level of interest? That's not really very clear right now. And then on top of that too, like what is considered more like for marketing to own versus before it gets passed over to a salesperson. If this person who's the CRO, like she hasn't led a marketing team before, and so she's saying that like, oh, because we're such a small company, like anybody who shows even the slightest bit of interest, we need to have a salesperson follow up with them. And I'm trying to explain to her like, no, this is not the way to do things.
A couple thoughts, and Sydney, feel free to share some other ones, but I'll just talk through what I'm thinking. I think that in early stage companies, I actually had a conversation with one yesterday where they basically have no revenue. They have 5 sales reps. The sales reps are not huge prospectors, so they're just sitting there. So basically it's like how do we just get these people to have some activity, right? Like we just need the reps. Part of that is a planning issue, but part of that is that like at the early stage, just getting the reps has value. Like just having just being able to have the conversation or send the email and see if someone responds, or do the demo so that one more person or one more account like understands more about your company, even if you're losing a bunch. When you start reaching scale, when you're 1,000 people and you do this, then it'll show up in the financial metrics really quick, because the inefficiencies just there's too much scale in the inefficiencies. At the earlier stage, like you don't feel that as much because you have less reps. There's not a ton of marketing investment. The company's smaller. It's just a little bit more controllable. For me, I'm interpreting more of a philosophical part of this. I share some of the ideas on like philosophical stuff. Is like, just because this person was on our website or downloaded our content, it doesn't mean that they want to hear from us. But I think that if approached in the right way, like there are people that come to our website that like a CMO came yesterday. We use a tool to identify that, this CMO from this company was on our website. Here's their LinkedIn profile. Here's their email address. I just go in and send a message about what we're working on and start a conversation. And that is it going to turn into a net new customer or our biggest customer? Probably not. But is it valuable for me to try and have the meeting, get feedback from them, get another rep on pitching what we're doing? Like there is some value in that. So I'm coming to this with a little bit more of a balanced approach between like philosophical and practicality for where you are, but also understanding from the CRO's perspective what's most important to them. If what's most important to them is we need reps, we need our people like talking to the right people, even if we're losing. Early stage companies care less about efficiency. Everyone cares about it, but early stage companies tend to care less about it. So I think those are just some of the dynamics that are at play here. Sydney, what do you think about what Amy should do?
You need to segment, some of the, I would call them higher quality leads, right? And make sure that there's a standard process for that. But at the same time, you're going to need to help and align with the sales leader and give them a way to get at bats. Maybe the way that they get at bats is through using a new tool that can give them some data that they can go experiment with. Maybe the way is that marketing stands up something that generates some data that they can then kind of use to fuel their outbound, if you will, with different expectations of those activities. I think where this breaks down is, say, sales is working all these leads and none of them are converting. No, no, no. Sales is working these leads and these leads are converting because the expectation is this and the SLA is this. And we have a process to look at all of that. Now, over here, this bucket of activities is an unknown of how they're going to connect rate. It's an unknown of their conversion rate, their meeting booking rate, and it's kind of more of a experiment. And you can look at it kind of in those two lenses to try to drive mutual beneficial outcomes while not being forced to take all the marketing resources and all the marketing time to do something that maybe you don't believe is the best strategy, and it's kind of diverting the overall marketing strategy.
This old idea that the only way for sales to do something is if marketing provides a signal or a lead to somebody, but like I'm in the camp now where like RevOps should be producing a lot of these signals for sales, not marketing dollars. We should be buying tools and data and serving that up at a much lower cost and using that as the main fuel for independent sales prospecting rather than paying $150 or more per lead for somebody that doesn't want to talk to our sales team. I'm trying to bust that myth as well, that RevOps should be accountable to providing the signals for a lot of the independent sales prospecting efforts moving forward. Maybe that's another opportunity. Sydney mentioned finding another tool or something like that. It's basically like teaching the company that not only like there's other reasons that our sales team can do stuff other than MQLs.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
A lot of sales orgs and sales leaders are kind of stepping up and doing this on their own, that I've noticed in specifically smaller organizations that are looking to scale as well. So,
hi, Chris. Hi, Sydney. So I just want to ask. So obviously, it's glad to hear that brand is becoming a much bigger thing. I feel like it's been a long time coming, and I feel like a lot of people are seeing the benefits of that. And as part of that, key opinion leader strategies, I feel like are becoming like more and more common. But I think it's difficult to know where to start, and especially if I think as B2B SaaS particularly, it can feel a little bit like dishonest if you were to have like your CMO or whoever is like a C-suite like thought leader trying to be that person, like being the key opinion leader. I don't know like where the balance is, and like both Chris and Sydney, like you are both like key opinion leaders like within the industry. So I'm not sure, how would you go about kind of building that strategy? And like, do you see any issues with, appearances of like bias or dishonesty, particularly if you're leaning on like a key opinion leader within B2B SaaS, like specifically?
So I like to make a clear distinction between an evangelist, who is generally an internal person, versus a key opinion leader who leads opinions that's external. And I don't believe this is an either or type of strat. And then you sort of have an influencer, which is a little different than a key opinion leader in terms of their involvement and what the value they provide and things like that. And I think that you should have all of these different things running. If you really have a ramped up strategy, like you should have someone like me at your company that's evangelizing your solution and where the market's going and helping your target market. You should have that. You should also be partnered with people that have a ton of influence, that'll use your product, give you feedback, take reference calls with customers, talk about the way that they're doing it, find new ways for you to do it, give you feedback on what features to build, what the market needs, what the competitive landscape is. That's a key opinion leader. And that external perspective gives you a different view than the things that you see internally from an evangelist. I think it's really about having both of those things going. Internal evangelist is more of a popular strategy today. Even though I think many times the key opinion leader strategy would be more effective because of the third party, because of the less bias, because of the couple of the things that you had mentioned, as generally thinking about them as two different things, making that distinction, and then looking at ideally both of them.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. That totally makes sense. And I think the distinction is important for sure. I'm curious to know, like, so where in the mix, like, would you kind of place priority with a key opinion leader strategy? Like, where would that fit as far as like your brand, like growing brand, like how important is it? Like, how would you kind of rank it?
I think when you think about like key opinion leader, like many companies already pay Gartner to be in the quadrant. They pay Forrester. A lot of MarTech companies are paying go-to-market partners. Like, and then just keep going and think about, okay, well, companies already spend there. They just spend it on analyst firms, not individuals. And just thinking about rounding that out, I think is a good way to look at it. I think acknowledging that we already spend money here. Do we just do it with different types of vendors? I think there's a lot of dependency on it, but like if you can think about whatever marketing or sales technology product, and then you think about the top 10 people that you consume content on LinkedIn, and then imagine if those 10 people were attached and partnered with that tool, how much better that tool would be in terms of brand awareness, market positioning, clarity, things like that. That if you just do that thought experiment, you say, wow, this could be pretty impactful if done in the right way. So it's hard to say like, is this priority number 3 or priority number 7? Like I'm not here to say that, or I don't have the list of available options. But I think if you do the thinking around it, you could see how there could be a pretty meaningful, tangible impact in implementing it. We don't think about enough the difference between us doing our own marketing and then other people marketing for us, and trying to think about having a balance between those two things, I think is also an interesting way to think about it.
We are coming full circle again, everybody. We're bringing David on and we're going back to events.
Hello.
Love it.
Hi, Chris. Hello, everyone. So I dropped a comment in, and Sydney said, "Yeah, come on and let's have a chat." So you were talking about different types of events. Some are more brand oriented. Some are more have other goals. And I guess for many of the folks who are be on the call here today or listening, they're not like the big oracles and semantics and those kinds of players where a different group actually owns the budget and execution for some of these national events like RSA or HIMSS or NRF and those big kind of trade events. At those bigger events, it's like an ecosystem marketplace rather than some of the trade show, the smaller regional shows. And perhaps, I guess the thought I wanted to drop into the conversation was having different goals at these different events is something you've talked about. You've talked about in other sessions, not necessarily today, about filming activity that takes place at these events, using it as a way to create content with energy to it, perhaps becoming a reporter for the event that you're sharing back to all the many people who couldn't come to the event, what's going on at the event. But I guess to stop the ramble and let you have a question is, what are some ways that a smaller company at RSA, with let's say a 10 by 10 booth, and RSA is a very large national security show, if you're not familiar with that. You're a smaller vendor, you've got a 10 by 10, and you want to take advantage of not just the lead generation potential, let's just call it that, but you'd like to take advantage of some other things to do with the ecosystem presence and the fact that there's all these different players who work here. What might be some other things you would suggest that a smaller vendor with a smaller presence in the 15th row back could leverage the event in a way that they could come back and say, we didn't just get leads, but we also got all these other good things too.
So just to clarify my original perspective, because you got me there, like if we're not spending $20,000, $100,000, $250,000, $500,000 or more on a booth, then I don't think that you need to scrutinize the event against direct ROI. So that's one key distinction. If you're just sending 4 people there, you're doing product marketing, market research, you're creating content, you're having, business development meetings with partners, and you're just doing that, then that's just part of the gig. That's like part of the job. And I don't think you need to scrutinize that against direct ROI. In your exact example, I would argue whether you actually need the booth or not. Like I would say, fuck the 10 by 10 booth and let's just go to the event and do some of those types of activities. I think that market research is a great reason to be at the event. I think that creating content with industry, like you have all the people, your customers, thought leaders, the people speaking at the events, potential partners, you have everyone there to create it. So whether it's reporting, like a reporting framework, having a place to do a podcast, that's a play that I've run since 2017 at trade shows to create podcasts and content with people. I think that you could do sales meetings with net new prospects or existing customers in a bunch of different places without having a booth. I think that probably do some type of like creative guerrilla marketing tactic around the event without actually having the booth. This interesting sort of scrappy plays. So like those are a couple of probably many other things that you could do, but I think those are some of the things that come top of mind. It's not about the idea that there's all of these people that we want all in one physical location has a ton of value. What I'm challenging is the amount of money that's spent on the booth that feels unnecessary to extract most of the value from that event.
Agree. And all of those things that you mentioned as other ways of extracting value require planning. And you might set some goals for yourself. We want to do this many of those or that many of these things. And you might have to do a lot of stuff before the event. I've always found that events become like lines in the sand for getting shit done. Right? The new document, the new web page, the new release, the new this, the new that. It becomes we needed to get all of this stuff done so that we can talk about it. And it's ready and it's there because we kind of said we ought to have it by then. So events can serve lots of kind of valuable benefits beyond just we generated leads and we came back and we can attribute a certain amount of revenue to something that happened because of that event. And I just wanted to kind of like open the conversation to a bit of that.
For sure. Yeah. Like this event that we do every week, like I don't even look at, I would never look at direct ROI against this event. I don't look at the people that attended that became a customer. We don't have some influenced revenue report to justify the event. Like literally nothing around this event is driven toward direct ROI or sales. This is an expenditure to create content, and it becomes a very reasonable, cost-effective way to create content for a podcast, LinkedIn, have a live event, fuel an email strategy, future to implement AI and have a website content like blog strategy, all that stuff just by sitting down here for an hour. And so I think that there are certain events that if it's for brand, then really make it for brand. Like never look at the metrics around direct ROI, do what's best for your customer and have the mindset around what those things are. It's just hard to do that when you with something that's cost $500,000 and say it's for brand. This entire thing with the people time from the people that work here and the cost of the studio probably costs us maybe $300, $500 to put on every week. It's just not that much of an expense. Those are the things that we should be doing for brand. I think the things that are lower cost, that require a lot of effort, that require expertise and focus, that require specialized resources. But to me, it's really hard to chalk something up for brand when it's super expensive.
And indeed, I think, this is, again, taking the words that you've already shared. Can you take budget that is not being used effectively or isn't seeming to bring back a good result, and even go to some of the smaller regional shows with some of these brand-like activities in mind, because you've got some money now to spend on maybe hiring a local film crew, renting a room where you can have better meetings than the little tabletop that you've got on the regional kind of ballroom show, and leverage some of that content creation. And some of the kind of maybe bring someone to the event who couldn't normally go to these events because you freed up the budget and make it a learning activity. It's a great place for SDRs and sales reps to interact and test out things and get reactions too. So there's lots of great opportunities. I mean, events are essentially the modern way of doing medieval marketplaces. Everyone came together in the one place. You talked to each other, bought things and sold things. Anyway, that's enough for me today, but I just wanted to kind of like bring in some other aspects of how you can leverage events beyond just the leads.
100%. Great comment. And I think that there was also some clarification there that I think is helpful for people. So thanks.
Yeah, a lot of people are, spending $5,000 to $10,000 to get a film crew, get the full stage set up. And we're seeing that a lot with, at least in the marketing space at micro events. And it's much more useful, and begs the question of whether they budget that towards events or whether they budget that towards content creation expense, like on-site content creation expense. Because obviously how you budget things greatly impacts, expectations of goals. All right, we are going to Omar next.
Chris, good to see you, man. So I wanted to, I was thinking about what you're saying about events. I completely agree because I'm very much like you. I'm a big favor of cutting needless expenses just to improve EBITDA and more importantly, like add to operating income. For context for everybody, I work in the med device, med tech arena where, conferences are like where people spend a lot of money on, right? The problem with a lot of companies in my industry, I think a lot of companies in general, is that they're not disciplined. So the moment you cut one thing and you have this free, extra free cash flow, they're going to spend it on something else. And I was wondering, Chris, if you can just kind of take this idea that I was thinking of, which is rather than cutting events, I feel like a lot of events, at least in my industry, and you know it well, are focused on generating demand versus capturing demand. And I'm wondering if there's a way that, like how you would set it up where rather than focusing on capturing demand, in which case it's like huge booth, a lot of money is spent on getting attention and capturing demand, that you reallocate that and do smaller booths and more specific, the specific goals of these events is to close deals. So essentially, instead of generating demand, you're capturing demand. Sorry, I kind of messed that around.
Yeah.
Does that make sense so far?
Build the booth to close deals. That's what you're saying.
Well, not to build a booth to close deals, but to focus the events on closing deals and capturing demand versus generating them.
Understood.
And I'm wondering if that's the better way to look at them, because for me to convince companies in my industry just to cut events completely, it would be really, really difficult. And I still see a lot of value in these events, but I agree with you that there's a lot of like excess spend on them. And I was wondering if you can just maybe take that idea and kind of expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been a B2B marketer since 2012. I've probably attended more than 100 different B2B conferences for all these different types of specialties and regionals and nationals and the 40 by 20 booth and the 10 by 10 tables. And I've seen it all. Since as early as 2013, after returning from every trade show, you would just hear people say, it was probably because this year it was in Orlando, and people and they would blame it on the location or they would blame it on the time. But every single time it was the sentiment was, we are not getting the appropriate value out of these events. And you just continuously at different companies and different industries with different buyers, with different budgets, hear the exact same thing from a bunch of different people. The same sentiment of, we don't feel like these events are delivering the appropriate ROI. That at that point, I consulted with a company yesterday. They're an early stage company. They got a small booth at some massive conference. They had 26 meetings and created 0 in pipe. What's the ROI of that event in terms of the booth expenditures, all the T&E? They probably spent 20% of their overall marketing budget on this one event. What's the ROI there? And so what you're saying is basically what I'm saying, is that and you're looking at it at closing deals. I'm thinking about it as generating pipe, which is the beginning stage of closing a deal. And you can look at it as accelerating pipe too. I'm happy anything that's not focused on building brand, anything that's more into the sales side of it. And just saying, is this event delivering here? And not trying to confuse it with, oh, we created some demand or we built some brand or all of these fluffy reasons why we should keep going back. And just saying, we went to 19 events last year. We spent this much on each different event. How many meetings did we have? How much pipe was created? How many deals were accelerated? How much revenue did we close? If we can't get a one-to-one, then we have to really talk about whether we should be here again next year or not. And that's just an incredibly simplistic way and a practical way to just look at the events. And it doesn't mean that you go from 19 to 0. It probably means you go from 19 to 6. And then with the 6 that you have, you're a lot smarter in how you execute against the 6. And then you have $2 or $3 million left over to use on digital, bottom line, EBITDA, product development, customer success, a million other places that could make the business better instead of building 12 other booths that year. Just predicated on the experience of just having so many smart people tell me and observe the exact same thing that I saw and just see over and over. And I'm sure that when you go to the conferences and booths, like you hear a similar sentiment. I'm sure the people that are on this call have heard similar sentiments before. We can put together a nice, marketing slide about how good everything happened at the event, and we can put some numbers around to it. But when you actually ask the people that were there and you feel what they're saying, it just feels like people know what's happened. They know the reality. It's not delivering what it used to be, and it's because of how the internet has changed the world. Trade show conferences were one of the only ways to discover new products in the early 2000s. One of the only ways. Your friends weren't telling you about it, especially in B2B. You barely even knew how to connect with your friends or peers. You weren't hearing about it on social media. Companies didn't have websites. People weren't emailing you a bunch. There was just... So what did you do? You flew somewhere once or twice a year. You got continuing education credits. You learned some things. You carefully perused every single booth, and you looked around to see what was available and new. And then you took the brochures and you brought them all back to the office and you told other people about the things that were available. That is just not how the world works anymore. But trade show conferences and the expenditures around them work the same way, and they are thought about in the same way of how the world worked in the early 2000s. Where you can think for everyone in here that's been to a trade show, not as a vendor, but as an attendee. Did you walk through and carefully look at every booth and sit down and think about trying to find a new technology or a new thing? No,
definitely
you
not.
Definitely did not do that. And that is the only fucking reason why you would spend money to buy a booth, is so that new people would discover you. And frankly, there's just a million other more cost-effective ways to get your target customer to discover you today than hoping they stumble upon your booth at a conference.
Do you think a big part? I completely agree with you. Do you think a part of this is that an older, more traditional industries like medtech and stuff? I when I go to the conferences, I've noticed even larger companies, right? They've reduced their booth size, but I don't see them allocating that spend to other places. Do you feel like that a lot of companies still haven't factored in the cost of creative? When you create a blog, a webinar, or any of these things, they haven't factored in that the creative costs money and we have to invest in that.
I think in your specific space with medtech, it is just it's a risk-averse, slow-moving industry that doesn't have a lot of new thinking. The executives at the company, because of how they hire, say, we're only going to hire an executive if they've been in medtech or, class 2 medical devices for the past 20 years, and they hopefully worked at Medtronic or one of these places. And so you have this ecosystem of all these people and all these executives that all think the same way, and they're generally later in their career because of the experience requirements. And you just get no new thinking and no new innovation in the industry, which is why you still have field sales teams most of the time, why companies barely ever spend on digital, why they don't create a lot of content. It's all the same stuff the same play they've been running for the past 20 years. And so you can see that because they spend a lot of money on events, but they don't spend on digital. So it's different than how a software company would spend. It's just imbalanced, sales support and then field sales.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, in some ways I miss the medtech industry. In other ways, I don't.
We got to find the right companies for you to come and save, man. So
Okay, we've got a couple more questions. We'll try to get to one more, and we'll have a couple
All
queued
right.
up for next time.
We'll do some rapid fire.
So this is an anonymous question. What is your approach for developing a strategic marketing plan from scratch? The ICP is CHROs at enterprise companies, HR software. Not sure of the ACV. I know this is a broad question, but trying to get your take for interview advice.
Oof, maybe we should save this till next time because this event closes in 5 minutes and I probably could talk about this for a whole event. I no longer think about a strategic marketing plan. When I'm thinking about it, I think about it as the go-to-market strategy and elevating it to that one level. And when you do that, you see how all the parts are connected that you don't see when you just build your strategic marketing plan in a silo. So that's one thing, is sort of elevating the thinking, which changes the things that you look at. And then when you actually get into the marketing, a lot of it is dependent on all of the other downstream resources. Your marketing strategy will be very different if you have 20 SDRs or 0 SDRs. Your marketing strategy will be very different if you have 100 reps that are segmented by enterprise, SMB, mid-market, micro, versus you have 6 reps that all are just on a round robin. Like, you need to be able to look at the whole. Your marketing strategy would be different if you have 120% NRR versus 96% NRR. And so being able to look at the whole thing and then use that business context to then start to drive how you think about marketing inside of that engine, I think, is one key point. Another undeniable part of it is that your target market needs to be, and the insights from the market need to be a massive input to how you think about your marketing strategy, how you think about your go-to-market strategy and how you sell, but also in the marketing side, what channels they use, who they trust, what, how they want to buy, how they think about the other available options inside of the category, how they think about the status quo, how they think about you. All that stuff has to be factored into what you do. And then at a high level, our job in a marketing plan is to change the way that a market thinks about something. At its simplest form, we have a bunch of people that matter to us. They think a certain way right now, and we need to help them change the way that they think about a certain thing that gets them more interested or more open to a new way of looking at things, which might involve using our product or something like that. And when you think about it like that, then you get led toward a lot more content. You think about distribution differently. You think about your event strategy differently. That it's just about changing the way that people think. And then once you change the way that people think, sales conversations have a completely different context. People are more open to thinking about it. People are more interested in learning. People are more interested in sharing that information. So without getting super, and I probably have, maybe we could try as a test. We're like doing these tests with AI based on all the library of stuff that I've talked about. Like, it would be interesting to try to do that and just say, like, how do you think about building a strategic marketing plan, just using all the things I've talked about and see what it comes up with. But so without going super detailed, like, business context, think about it overall as go to market, not just marketing. You need to have a lot of customer insights into it. And that type of stuff will drive your budgeting, your channels, how much content you have, how you lean between digital and physical. I appreciate you all being here. Thanks for all the feedback and input, and hope to see you again soon.